Ibinabo, before we cross any further, there is something I need you to prepare.
Prepare your mind for. Tamuno, if you tell me there's a crocodile under this bridge, I will personally push you first.
Long before the country knew him as Tamuno Briggs, founder of Briggs Blue Harvest, one of the largest seafood export and cold chain companies in the Niger Delta, he was simply a small boy in a fishing settlement called Opu Ama, where the creek was both the source of every meal and the greatest danger his family faced. His father, Papa Prey, was not struck down by illness, and he did not simply vanish one ordinary day. His death came violently, unforgettably, on a night that the entire settlement still speaks of in hushed voices. A sudden storm rose without warning, while Papa Prey and two other fishermen were far out on the water, checking their traps for crayfish. The waves that night grew taller than the canoes themselves. Only one of the three men returned to shore alive, and he returned with nothing but grief and a torn fishing net that had once belonged to Tamuno's father. Tamuno was 7 years old that night, and he remembers only fragments. The sound of his mother's scream carrying across the water,
Tamuno,
the smell of kerosene lanterns, and the terrible silence that followed 3 days of searching that never recovered his father's body. From that night forward, the creek that had once fed his family became something Tamuno both feared and depended upon. His mother, Mama Ibiba, could not bring herself to send her only son onto the water to fish, so she found another way to survive. She became a weaver of fishing nets and traditional raffia baskets, sitting for hours beneath a large almond tree near the settlement's landing, her fingers moving with practiced speed, selling her work to fishermen and traders who passed through Opuama on their way to the bigger markets in Yenagoa. Some weeks, traders bought everything she made. Other weeks, the baskets sat unsold. And on those nights, mother and son shared a single plate of gari soaked in water, pretending the meal was enough. Mama Ibiba gently asked Tamuno, "What is on your mind tonight?" Tamuno answered with determination, "Mama, one day I will build boats bigger than any that pass through this creek. I will buy you a house that stands on solid ground, far from the water that took Papa. You will never have to weave baskets under that tree again." His mother smiled, but her voice grew serious as she placed her rough hand over his, then said, "My son, I pray you get everything you are dreaming of. But hear me well. A man's wealth can build him a mansion, but it cannot build him a conscience. Never let money decide the kind of heart you carry. Never look down on anyone the way this creek nearly looked down on us." Years passed. Tamuno grew tall and sharp-minded, excelling in the small community school run by missionaries near the settlement. But before he could fulfill the promise he had made his mother, tragedy visited their small family once more. Not the river this time, but a raging fire that swept through the settlement's market during the dry season, started by an unattended cooking fire 2 stalls away from where Mama Ibiba sold her baskets. She never made it out of the smoke in time. On the day of her burial, Tamuno knelt at the graveside and made a vow that would define the rest of his life. Tamuno, with a voice breaking, "Mama, I couldn't save you from the water, and I couldn't save you from the fire. But I promise you this. I will build something so solid, so far above every danger this land can throw at us, that our name will never be forgotten in Opuama." Tamuno finished secondary school through a church scholarship and moved to Yenagoa with a single duffel bag and a stubborn refusal to let his circumstances define him. He started small, buying fresh catfish and crayfish directly from fishermen along the creeks at dawn, then reselling them at a modest markup to hotels and restaurants in the city before the fish could spoil. His first office was the tricycle itself. Many nights, rather than pay for a room, he slept on a mat spread across crates of empty coolers inside a rented storage shed, waking with the smell of fish, permanently soaked into his clothes, washing quickly at a public tap before returning to the water's edge to begin again. success did not come easily. A cold storage supplier Tamuno had trusted with a large advance payment for freezer equipment disappeared entirely, taking with him nearly every naira Tamuno had saved toward opening his first proper depot. For weeks afterward, fish spoiled in the heat because there was no equipment to preserve it, and Tamuno watched months of profit rot away in the open sun. Tamuno whispering with deep concern, "Why does everything I build keep slipping through my fingers?" He approached microfinance banks across Yenagoa, hoping for a loan to rebuild. Every single one turned him away. Loan officer dismissive said, "A fish trading business without proper storage is too unstable to finance. We cannot approve this." Friends who once cheered him on slowly disappeared from his life, uncomfortable being associated with a man the community whispered had failed. But Tamuno refused to give up. He taught himself basic refrigeration mechanics by watching technicians repair broken freezers at the Yenagoa Central Market, trading his labor for lessons. He learned to negotiate directly with trawler operators along the coast, cutting out costly middlemen entirely. One small supply contract became 5. 5 became 50. Within a decade, Briggs Blue Harvest had grown into one of the largest seafood processing and export companies in the entire Niger Delta region, supplying premium smoked and frozen seafood to markets as far away as Lagos and Abuja, and eventually to buyers overseas. Business magazines that had never once mentioned his name now placed his photograph on their covers, celebrating the boy from a stilt house who had built an empire on the very water that once took his father. Tamuno purchased a sprawling contemporary home overlooking the Yenagoa waterfront, filled his garage with imported vehicles, and became a name spoken with respect across the entire South-South region. Yet, every evening, once his meetings ended and the depot's lights switched off, Tamuno returned to his beautiful, spacious home, sat alone at a dining table meant for 12, and ate dinner in a silence so complete he could hear the ceiling fan turning above him. Hoping to fill that silence, Tamuno began courting. The first woman he dated seemed sweet enough, until she began pressuring him to relocate her entire extended family, cousins, in-laws, and all, into properties under his name, insisting it was simply what a serious man did for the woman he intended to marry. When he hesitated, she accused him of never truly loving her at all. That relationship ended within months. He met another woman who claimed to admire his humble beginnings, until Tamuno discovered she had been quietly researching his company's financial filings, asking pointed questions about shareholding structures disguised as innocent curiosity. A third woman openly compared him, in front of mutual friends, to a state contractor she had previously dated, remarking on whose convoy was longer. Then came a woman who appeared to genuinely enjoy his company, until Tamuno mentioned, as a quiet test, that he was considering donating a significant portion of his profits that year to rebuild flood-damaged homes along the creek, instead of purchasing the new speedboat she had been hinting about. Her enthusiasm cooled instantly, and within a month she too was gone. After years of this pattern, Tamuno noticed something that wounded him more deeply than any failed business deal ever had. Not one of these women had ever asked what frightened him at night, or what he still dreamed about his mother, or whether the empire he had built had actually made him happy. Every conversation eventually circled back to what he could provide. Am I a man to anyone, or simply a company with a face attached to it? Through every version of Tamuno's rise and every disappointment that followed, one person never once changed toward him: his logistics coordinator and closest friend, God's Power Wobo, a soft-spoken man who had joined the company in its earliest, most fragile days, back when it was still just a tricycle and a cooler of fish. God's Power had turned down more lucrative job offers from rival companies simply to stay loyal to a business he had watched grow from nothing. Tamuno had quietly sponsored the training of God's Power's younger sister as a marine engineer, never once mentioning it or expecting gratitude. God's Power's own mother, whenever she called her son, ended every conversation with the same prayer for his employer, that God would surround him with people who loved him honestly, not for what sat in his account. One evening, after a long day supervising a new export shipment, Tamuno and God's Power sat on the depot's loading dock, watching the sun set over the water. Tamuno to God's Power, "Can I ask you something honest?" God's Power responded, "Always, Oga." Tamuno, staring at the water, asked, "Do you think it is possible for anyone to love me without first loving what I own?" God's Power considered the question carefully before responding. God's Power answered Oga, "I will tell you the truth. The problem is not that people cannot love you. The problem is that nobody meets the real you before they meet Briggs Blue Harvest. By the time a woman shakes your hand, she has already heard your net worth from 3 different people." Tamuno sat in silence, those words settling into him slowly, the way water settles into dry soil after a long drought. That single conversation would soon give birth to a plan neither man could have predicted. God's Power's words haunted Tamuno for days. Every handshake at every business function suddenly felt like proof of the very problem his friend had named. If you have ever wondered whether the people around you love you or simply love what you can offer them, subscribe to this channel right now, because the unusual plan Tamuno is about to set in motion will completely change how you think about honesty, disguise, and the courage it takes to let yourself finally be seen. Stay with me. This story is only just beginning. One evening, Tamuno called God's Power into his office with an idea so unusual that God's Power initially assumed he was joking entirely. Tamuno to God's Power, "I want us to switch places, just for one evening. You become me. I become your loading supervisor for the night." God's Power, staring at him, said, "Oga, with respect, this is the worst idea you have ever had, and you have had some terrible ideas." But Tamuno had already arranged everything with his childhood friend, Preye Ambakederemo, a hotelier hosting a lavish anniversary gala that weekend at his newly renovated waterfront event center. Preye had laughed for nearly 10 minutes on the phone before finally agreeing to play along. God's Power said, "Fine, one evening. But if I embarrass you in front of the whole of Yenagoa, do not blame me." The following afternoon became a scene of pure comedy inside Tamuno's dressing room. God's Power struggled fiercely with a set of cufflinks, eventually declaring them designed by an enemy of mankind. Tamuno, dressed instead in God's Power's simple work uniform and a faded company cap, practiced walking with the deliberate, unhurried gait of a driver rather than an executive, while God's Power coached him between fits of laughter. God's Power, laughing, said, "Oga, stop smiling so much. Drivers who smile like that at gatherings look suspicious." Tamuno, laughing back, responded, "And you, stop gripping that champagne glass like you are afraid it will run away from you." By evening, the transformation was complete. Neither man could look at the other without laughing. Preye's waterfront event center glittered that evening, with fairy lights strung across the water's edge, a live high-life band playing beneath a canopy, and rows of luxury vehicles lining the entrance. Tamuno parked the car and stepped out first, opening the rear door for God's Power exactly as rehearsed. A guest said, "Mr. Briggs, it's such an honor. Your story is so inspiring." Standing a few steps away, Tamuno organized car keys quietly, invisible to every passing eye. One woman thrust an empty champagne flute toward him without so much as a glance. She said, "Driver, dispose of this for me, please." Tamuno, accepting it, politely responded, "Certainly, ma." She walked away without a word of thanks. Tamuno stood holding the empty glass, feeling something shift quietly inside him. Tamuno, whispering to himself, "So this is what it feels like to disappear in front of people's eyes." Inside the hall, as Preye called Tamuno up to deliver a toast, causing God's power to freeze momentarily before walking nervously toward the podium. An unrelated commotion broke out near the buffet table. A young woman's clutch purse, accidentally knocked by a passing waiter's tray, spilled its contents across the floor, including a small prescription bottle that rolled directly toward Tamuno's feet. Tamuno, as he picked them up, gently said, "I believe these belong to you." The young woman knelt beside him, gathering the rest of her things, visibly embarrassed about the prescription bottle in particular. Ibinabo quickly explaining, almost defensively, "My son. It's for my father. He has high blood pressure. I carry his medication because he sometimes forgets to take it with him." Tamuno responded warmly, "There's nothing to explain. That is a caring thing to do for your father." Something in the sincerity of his response caught her off guard. Around them, a few guests had noticed the small scene and were already whispering, "That's just the driver helping her." Poor girl, embarrassing herself in front of everyone. But the young woman did not seem embarrassed by Tamuno at all. She looked at him directly, unbothered by what anyone assumed about his position. Ibinabo, smiling, said to him, "Thank you for not making a whole scene of it."
Don't worry, I have got you.
Later that evening, Tamuno found her sitting alone near the water's edge, away from the noise of the gala, watching the reflection of the fairy lights ripple across the creek. Tamuno walked to where she was and said, "May I ask your name?" Ibinabo, smiling, responded, "Ibinabo, and you?" He responded, "I'm Tamuno." "It's nice to properly meet you, Ibinabo." They spoke for nearly 2 hours without either of them noticing the time passing. Ibinabo explained that she worked as a community pharmacist, running a small dispensary in one of Yenagoa's busier neighborhoods, and volunteered every other weekend at a free health outreach post that served fishing settlements along the creeks. Settlements not unlike the one Tamuno had grown up in. Ibinabo continued, "Some weekends, we treat over 100 people who would otherwise have no access to basic medicine. It's exhausting, but it matters more than anything else I do." Tamuno listened, captivated, before she eventually turned the question back toward him. Ibinabo asked, "What about you? What do you do?" Tamuno hesitated, bracing for the familiar shift he had witnessed in other women's eyes. Tamuno said, "I work in logistics. I load and transport goods for a seafood company." Ibinabo, without missing a beat, "That's honest physical work. I respect anyone who moves goods that feed people. It's not glamorous, but it matters." No flicker of disappointment crossed her face, no cooling of her warmth. Tamuno felt something tighten in his chest, the same disbelief he had felt only once before. In a fleeting daydream he had never allowed himself to fully trust. Over the following weeks, their bond deepened steadily. Tamuno deliberately avoided expensive settings, instead accompanying Ibinabo on her weekend outreach visits to riverine communities, helping unload boxes of medicine from her small boat, playing football with children on the sandy banks while she attended to patients. Not once did she ask him for gifts. Not once did she compare him to wealthier men she had met through her work at galas and hospital fundraisers. Not once did she treat his supposed occupation as anything less than dignified. Yet one question continued to gnaw at Tamuno, refusing to let him rest completely. Would Ibinabo's warmth survive if she believed he had nothing at all? Not simply a modest job, but genuinely nothing. He confided this lingering doubt to God's power, who sighed heavily, but eventually offered the key to his own uncle's abandoned stilt house, back in Opuama, the very settlement where Tamuno himself had been raised, though Ibinabo did not yet know that detail. God's power said, "Oga, this will be the last test I help you carry out. Continue like this, and you will test away a good woman before you even marry her." Tamuno quietly responded, "This is the final one, I promise you." A few days later, Tamuno invited Ibinabo to see where he claimed to have grown up, not revealing that it was, in fact, the true settlement of his childhood, though not his actual childhood home. This is, of course, the very moment where our story first began. Tamuno leading Ibinabo across that creaking wooden bridge, his heart hammering with every step, certain this moment would reveal the true shape of her heart. When Tamuno finally forced himself to look at her, bracing for the disappointment he had witnessed so many times, he found her eyes filled not with disgust, but with something far gentler. Ibinabo softly, stepping toward the house, said Tamuno, "This settlement, Opuama, I know this place. My outreach team comes here every third weekend." She turned to him, her expression tender, unaware of the deeper layer of his deception, believing only that fate had connected them in yet another meaningful way. Ibinabo, taking his hand, said, "You never told me you grew up in one of the communities I serve. No wonder you understood exactly what those children needed the first time we visited together." She embraced him tightly, tears gathering in her eyes. Ibinabo continued, "Elise, wherever we build our life together, we will never forget the people still living exactly like this. I promise you that." Tamuno held her, his own guilt rising sharply beneath his relief, because her acceptance had revealed something he had not fully anticipated. Ibinabo's heart was even purer than he had dared to hope, and his continued deception now felt less like a test and more like a betrayal of that purity. If this story has touched something inside you, if you have ever longed to be loved for exactly who you are beneath every title and every disguise, subscribe to this channel right now. Because what Tamuno does next, and the painful cost of the secret he is still carrying, will remind you that even love built on good intentions can crumble under the weight of an undisclosed truth. Stay with me. That night, sleep abandoned Tamuno entirely. He sat on his balcony overlooking the real waterfront estate he actually owned, tormented by the memory of Ibinabo's unguarded tears at the stilt house. Tears given freely to a story only half true. The next morning, God's power found him exactly where he had left him the night before. God's power asked, "You didn't sleep, Oga?" Tamuno responded away from the question he was asked. "She deserves the whole truth, God's power, not half of it dressed up as honesty." That evening, Tamuno invited Ibinabo to what she believed would be another simple outing. Instead, the taxi she boarded delivered her to iron gates guarded by uniformed security, opening onto a long driveway lit by garden lanterns, ending at a striking waterfront residence unlike anything she had imagined. Ibinabo, stunned, asked Tamuno, "What is this place? What is going on?" He led her to a quiet section of the garden overlooking the water, and there, with trembling hands, he told her everything. His true identity as the founder of Briggs Blue Harvest, the switched places plan at Praise Gala, and the deliberate second test at the Stilt House, though he was careful to clarify that the settlement's poverty and its people's needs were entirely real, and that his feelings for her had never once been part of the performance. Tamuno, with tears in his eyes, said, "I lied about my position because I was terrified of only ever being loved for what I own. I am sorry, Ibinabo. Every laugh, every visit to those villages, every conversation between us, none of that was a lie. Only my job title was." Ibinabo stood in silence for a long moment, her expression shifting from confusion to something far more painful. Ibinabo said, "You tested whether I could love a poor man, then you let me cry at a stranger's house, believing it was your own broken childhood." Tamuno interrupted Ibinabo. "Please," Ibinabo, voice breaking, she continued. "Do you understand what you have actually done? It is not that you are wealthy. It is that I do not know anymore which parts of us were real, and which parts were simply an experiment you were running on my heart." Without another word, she turned and walked back down the long driveway, disappearing through the gates without looking back, leaving Tamuno standing alone in the very garden where he had hoped to propose. The weeks that followed swallowed Tamuno whole. His calls went unanswered. His messages disappeared into silence, When he visited her small dispensary, a locum pharmacist informed him she had taken an extended leave to focus on her outreach work full-time, her exact location unknown. Every path toward her closed, one after another, until Tamuno stopped searching entirely and simply stopped functioning. God's power watched his friend deteriorate for weeks, his concern growing daily. God's power said, "Olga, you have survived a father lost to the river and a mother lost to fire. Do not let heartbreak be the thing that finally breaks you." Tamuno responded, "I found the one honest heart I had been searching for my whole life, God's power, and I poisoned it with my own fear." Then, one week during the height of the rainy season, devastating floods swept through several creek settlements along the Yenagoa waterways, including Opuama itself. News reports showed entire stilt communities submerged, families stranded on rooftops, emergency boats struggling to reach the worst-hit areas fast enough. Without hesitation, Tamuno mobilized his company's entire fleet of transport boats, redirecting them from seafood logistics to emergency evacuation, personally leading rescue teams into the flooded settlement where he had once lost both of his parents. Word of the rescue operation spread quickly across Yenagoa, and volunteer medical teams rushed to establish emergency treatment points along the water's edge for the displaced families. Among the volunteers who arrived within hours, medical bag in hand, ready to treat the injured and the exhausted, was Ibinabo. For a long moment, neither of them moved, the chaos of the rescue operation swirling around them, forgotten entirely. Ibinabo whispering Tamuno, Tamuno breathless, setting the child down gently with another volunteer, responded Ibinabo, "You came." Ibinabo, looking around at the rescue effort he had organized, asked, "You did all of this? For this settlement?" Tamuno responded, "This is where I lost my father to the water, and my mother to a fire she never deserved. I could not watch this place drown again, while I did nothing." Ibinabo studied him for a long moment, not the billionaire, not the disguised driver, but simply the exhausted, soaked, grieving man standing in front of her, giving everything he had to save the place that had once taken everything from him. Ibinabo softly said, "I have spent weeks trying to decide which version of you was real. Standing here, watching you do this, I think I finally have my answer." They worked side by side through the remainder of that long night, treating the injured, distributing supplies, comforting frightened children, and somewhere in the exhausted hours before dawn, without either of them fully deciding to, they found themselves standing close together again, the distance between them finally closing. Weeks later, once the floodwaters had receded and Opuama had begun rebuilding, with Briggs Blue Harvest funding new elevated housing far sturdier than anything the settlement had known before, Tamuno invited Ibinabo back to the very jetty where they had once shared roasted plantain during their earliest weeks together. Tamuno kneeling, no disguise this time, no test, no hidden identity, said Ibinabo. "Everything about who I am is finally on the table between us. No more switched places, no more borrowed houses, no more fear disguised as caution. Just a man who loves you completely, asking if you will build a life with him." Ibinabo, with tears of joy, responded, "Yes, Tamuno. 1,000 times yes." Their wedding, held months later on the rebuilt banks of Opuama itself, brought together an unlikely gathering. Company executives from Briggs Blue Harvest, standing alongside fishermen and their families, Ibinabo's outreach volunteers, dancing beside dock workers who had known Tamuno since his tricycle days. God's power stood proudly as best man, and during his own wedding toast, Tamuno turned to his oldest friend with visible emotion. Tamuno, during his speech, said, "If not for one honest conversation on a loading dock, I might never have understood what was truly missing in my life. Thank you for never once asking me for anything except the truth." In memory of both his parents, Tamuno established the Briggs Ibiba Resilience Foundation, permanently funding flood-resistant housing, emergency river rescue teams, and expanded free health outreach posts across the Creek settlements of Bayelsa State. Ibinabo left her small dispensary behind to lead the foundation's health division full-time, finally given the resources to reach every settlement her small weekend outreach team could once only dream of serving. As our story closes, remember this. Wealth can build you a house standing far above any flood, but only an honest heart can build you a home worth returning to. This is The Fisherman's Son Who Became a Billionaire. Thank you for watching. May Tamuno and Ibinabo's journey remind you that the truth, however frightening to speak aloud, is always the sturdier foundation to build upon.